1973, a vicious killer stalked the city of Baghdad, Iraq. Those he killed sometimes received strange phone calls before having their homes invaded and their heads bashed in. In some cases, he killed whole families at a time to satisfy his greed and bloodlust. This case differs from others covered on this channel because to this day there is a question as to whether the man and accomplices that the murders were attributed to were actually the culprits or simply scapegoats, and the real killer was the secret police of Saddam Hussein. Hatem al-Hadum, also known as Abu Tobar, the Hatchet Man. Hatem was born in 1932 in Hilla, Iraq. He briefly served as a policeman after graduating from school until 1951, when he was fired for unprofessionalism. After this, he studied at the Air Force Academy, but was kicked out in 1956 after he began flying his training aircraft like a stunt plane. At this point, he traveled to Kuwait to study business, then returned to Iraq to work as an accountant, but he was soon arrested for misusing state funds. He was sentenced to 2.5 years in jail. After being released, Hatem moved to Europe, specifically to West Germany. He spoke several languages, including German, English, Persian, Arabic, and Kurdish. These language skills were a great benefit as he began smuggling weapons and cars into Greece, Turkey, and Syria. After spending several years as a smuggler, Hatem returned to Iraq in the early 1970s. Iraq had changed while Hatem was in Europe. In 1968, there was a coup, and in 1969, Saddam Hussein officially took power. During his reign, the regime's secret police killed thousands of people, and some believe that the Abu Tobar murders were committed at the behest of the government to justify unwarranted searches and arrests of those who spoke out against the government. An interesting side note is that while the nickname given to the killer translates to the Hatchet Man or the Cleaver Man, the weapon used was more often a metal pipe. The first murder was that of a Jewish man in the Badawin neighborhood in Baghdad in early 1973. This neighborhood is near to the presidential palace. The killer's MO was to call the victim, likely to confirm that they were home, before knocking on the front door, then forcing his way in once the door was opened. His victims were beaten to death and robbed. Blood was smeared on the walls and was sometimes used to write threats. The first victim turned out to be a poor man, and the killer gained little, if anything, from the attack. The second attack claimed the lives of a husband and wife. Majida al-Hamani and her husband Rashid Murad Rashid lived in the Mansour neighborhood. Using the skills he learned at the police academy, the killer scouted out the home and then approached within months of the first murder. He pushed his way in and then used a metal pipe to threaten the couple into telling them where they hid their valuables. When this failed, he beat them to death, then ransacked the house, only finding a few pieces of jewelry. For the next murder, the killer was more ambitious, targeting retired police chief Bashir al-Sultan and his family on April 9, 1973. For this murder, it is suspected that Hatem recruited his nephew and possibly other family members to commit the heinous act. The crew watched the home from the garden of an abandoned house next door in the early morning hours. They waited until they knew the family was asleep, then moved in. They got into the house through an open window and massacred everyone inside the house, which included Bashir, his wife, their young son, and Bashir's nephew. The city of Baghdad was struck with terror as the murders escalated. People avoided leaving their homes and locked every door and window. Some families even slept on the roof to avoid being inside the house in case Abu Tobar came to visit. In September of 1973, Hatem and his nephew targeted Jean Ernest in the Karadat Mariam neighborhood, which is next to what would become the Green Zone. The killers cased the home before breaking in and murdering the occupants, Jean, his wife, and daughter. They were all killed by blows to the head before the killers stole all the cash and valuables inside the house. There was likely a fight as blood belonging to Hatem's nephew was found inside the house. The final murder stands out as different from the others. The victim was a barber, and during questioning, Hatem said he killed the man only because they had argued over the price of a haircut. After killing him, he stole not only his cash, but the carpets and furniture as well. With a murder on the loose, the situation had become dire in Baghdad. The police were conducting routine searches, and the city was under a strict curfew. Under the guise of searching for the killer, Saddam took this opportunity to purge dissidents. The search for the killer and anyone who spoke out against Saddam lasted until the nation shifted focus onto the war between Israel and Egypt in October of 1973. The killer was also inactive during this conflict, or at least was not reported on, which some believe was because he took part in the fighting, while others believe that the regime was simply not promoting the story. The theory that the murders were part of a government conspiracy is reinforced by the fact that the task force that was organized to catch Abu Tobar was raided by Saddam Hussein's personal bodyguards. There had been a phone call from someone who claimed to be the killer that was traced back to the presidential palace. When this was investigated, the task force was disbanded, and the investigator who ran the call center was sent to prison. The reign of terror ended in September of 1974. Someone called the police to report a suspicious man hanging around an abandoned house. When police arrived and stopped him, they initially were inclined to let him go after he explained that he was a former policeman. However, when they had him show them his home, they found a stockpile of items stolen from the victims, and he was arrested. During his interrogation, Hatem confessed to the 12 murders, although this confession was likely coerced. His wife also reported that he had come home covered in blood on multiple occasions. He claimed that he killed the victims to set them free, but also to rob them. After his confession, the suspect was paraded through the streets wearing a white lab coat spattered with blood. Hatem al-Hadum was sentenced to death by hanging. The execution took place 5 a.m. on October 8th of 1974. We will never know for sure whether he was the true culprit or if the series of murders was committed by the secret police for the benefit of Saddam Hussein.